Okay, so good day everyone. Today we are going to talk about the muscular system. So your muscular system, no, you have three types. No, that's your skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. I know you're very familiar with these terms. So first is your skeletal muscles. So your skeletal muscle fibers, they're packaged into the organs called your skeletal muscles, and that those attaches to your body skeleton, no. So these are very huge, no. Usually nakikita mo naman, no, with your eyes yung pag may muscles, lalo lalo na pag yung mga hips, 'di ba? Pag tatanggalin mo yung skin, makikita mo naman talaga na may muscles doon. Because these are very huge and they are cigar shaped multinucleated cells. So they have many nucleus in them in one cell. So these are the largest of your muscle types, no? So, kung makikita nyo, no, muscles, skeletal muscles have are striated because merong obvious na stripes. So that's why they're called striated. And they are voluntary muscles because of course na kokontrol mo naman yung muscle mo with your consciousness. Like example, gusto mo kunin yung baso sa table, 'di ba, nauutusan naman natin yung ating kamay na yung mga muscles natin sa kamay na kunin yung baso dun sa table. Pero minsan, no, meron tayong tinatawag na reflexes na kung saan gumagalaw yung ating skeletal muscles without our willed command. So, pag nabasa niyo lang yung skeletal muscles, always remember they are striated and they are voluntary. So, ayan, kung makikita nyo, yan, this is one muscle fiber. So, kaning isa ka muscle fiber, it is surrounded by, ang cover ng isang muscle fiber is what we call an endomysium. Yan, endomysium. Diba? So, kanang muscle fiber nga na ay cover na endomysium, pag imo na silang bugkuson nga daghan, mao na atong ginatawag na ang magbugkos na sa ila ang perimysium. Kana nga bundle, ang tawag ana is a fascicle. So, pag kanang mga fascicle na pod, imo na siyang bugkuson with an epimysium, nga ginatawag nato epimysium. So, mao na siya tong mahimo og entire muscle. So, next is your smooth muscle. So, always remember your smooth muscle has no striation. So, meaning it's non-striated. It's visceral because it's found mainly in the walls of hollow visceral organs and it is involuntary. Syempre, involuntary smooth muscle kasi hindi mo naman dili naman nimo atimanon nga ay kadiyot sa ako sang suguan ako ang mga smooth muscles na mag-digest og pagkaon, di ba? So they are involuntary. They're doing their thing without you consciously telling them to do so. Then your smooth muscle cells are spindle shaped. Makikita niyo yan. And they are single nucleus as opposed to your skeletal muscle kanina, di ba? They are multinucleated. And they have two layers. So, mas ma-appreciate nyo to microscopically. Basta one is running circularly and the other longitudinally. And the speed of contraction is slow and sustained. So your cardiac muscles, no, don't forget here when you say cardiac muscles, it is striated like your skeletal muscles and it is involuntary like your smooth muscles. Kasi hindi mo naman masasabihan ng heart mo na, oh, you stop pumping muna. So, it's involuntary. They serve as a pump, propelling blood into the blood vessels and to all tissues of the body. So, your cardiac cells are cushioned by small amounts of soft connective tissue and they are arranged in spiral or figure 8 shaped bundles. Your cardiac muscle fibers are, this is a buzzword, and meaning um, buzzword, is a buzzword, parang sa exam usually, no? Your branching cells are joined by special junctions called your intercalated discs. So, di ba, ma-obvious na this is a cardiac muscle pag merong intercalated discs. And this speed of contraction is very slow. So, yung purpose ng muscles mo, syempre, it's to produce movement, not as common function of all your muscle types. And it also helps you maintain posture and body position, stabilize joints, and generate heat. So next is your microscopic anatomy of your skeletal muscle. So first is you have your sarcolemma, that's your plasma membrane in your muscle cells. And next is your myofibrils. So your myofibrils, these are long ribbon-like organelles which nearly fill your cytoplasm, and this pushes the nuclei aside. So no, you have your light, no, light. That's your I band, and your darker bands, that's your A bands. So ayan, yung light band has a midline interruption na tinatawag nating Z disc, while yung dark band na tinatawag nating A band, they have a lighter central area called the H zone. So, dun sa H zone na yon is merong M line, no? And this M line has tiny protein rods that hold adjacent thick filaments together. So, don't worry, no? Some of this naman na I'm saying, this is just nice to know in your level. Because especially dun sa magpo-proceed ng med, talagang ito talaga yung inaaralin natin, no, sa first year. So, na physio. So, mas deeper na kasi to. Ayan. So, your myosin filaments, these are larger, thick filaments made mostly of bundled molecules of the protein called myosin. And your actin filaments naman, these are thin filaments, no, composed of the contractile protein called your actin. Your sarcoplasmic reticulum, these are specialized smooth endoplasmic reticulum that stores and releases calciums and provides the final go signal for contraction. So your skeletal muscles have some special functions that enable them to perform their duty. First, of course, is excitability, no? When you say excitability, no, they have the ability to be responsive, na may response. Meron silang ability to receive and to respond to a stimuli. When you say contractility, that's their ability to shorten kung adequately naman, kung enough naman yung stimulus. And extensibility, that's the ability of your muscle cells to be stretched. Your elasticity, that's the ability to recoil and resume their resting length after being stretched. So ayan, the nerve stimulus and action potential.
In this video, I'm going to explain an action potential. An action potential, or a nerve impulse, causes a movement of ions across the cell membrane of a neuron, similar to a ripple passing along the surface of a pond. The cell membrane of a neuron contains thousands of tiny molecules known as channels. These channels allow either sodium or potassium ions to pass through. Generally, the channels on a neuron are closed, and the membrane is said to be in a resting state. In this state, the charge of the inside of the cell membrane is more negative than the outside. And if you could imagine sticking microelectrode connected to a voltmeter inside this membrane, the reading would show about negative 70 millivolt, meaning that the inside of the neuron is about 70 millivolt less than the outside. The cell membrane of a neuron is polarized because of this electrical difference across the membrane. Now, a nerve impulse starts when pressure or other sensory inputs disturbs a neuron's plasma membrane, to the point that the potential difference reaches a threshold voltage of about negative 55 millivolt. This causes hundreds of sodium channels in that region of the membrane to open briefly. This in turn allows positively charged sodium ions to flow inside the cell membrane. Now the inside of the membrane temporarily becomes more positive than the outside, which in turn causes the voltage to rise. This is called depolarized state. The membrane is now depolarized because the net charge inside the axon changed from negative to positive as sodium ions entered in. As the impulse passes, the potassium channels begin to open, allowing positively charged potassium ions to flow out, which causes inside of the axon to resume a net negative charge. At this point, the voltage would fall. The membrane is now said to be repolarized because again, it's negatively charged on the inside and positively charged on the outside. Now, this depolarization and repolarization of a neuron membrane is called an action potential. Action potential is just another name for a nerve impulse. After a nerve impulse, some voltage-gated potassium channels remain open, resulting in further movement of potassium out of the cell. As the voltage falls below the reading of the resting state, the membrane is said to be hyperpolarized because it's even more negative than at the beginning. At this stage, neuron is unable to conduct a nerve impulse and it's said to be in the refractory period. The refractory period is a very short period during which the sodium-potassium pump continues to return sodium ions to the outside and potassium ions to the inside of the axon, thus returning the neuron to resting potential. So in summary, an action potential is just a wave of depolarization and repolarization. It's not an electric current. It's just a series of voltage-gated ions channels open and close. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and hopefully I made it wicked easy to understand.
Ayan, so, no, your nerve stimulus and action potential. So don't worry and don't get overwhelmed because that concept, no, is really hard to study and to understand. So, kumbaga nice to know lang din yan at this level. So just be well versed that no, there is this what we call a motor unit. No, that's in one neuron, and when you say unit, diba? Baga, that's the neuron and nung lahat ng skeletal muscle na sinistimulate niya. So, yung nerve fiber or axon, yun yung thread-like extension ng neuron na yon, no? Yan. So, we also have what we call acetylcholine. Yung acetylcholine, that's a specific neurotransmitter, no, that stimulate your skeletal muscle cells. And we also have your synaptic cleft. That's a gap between your nerve endings and the muscle cell membranes filled with tissue. So, ayan. When, ano yung mga events na nag-return the cell to its resting state? So, that's first, the diffusion of your potassium ions out of the cell and the operation of your sodium-potassium pump, no? That moves the sodium and potassium ions back to their initial positions.
Sliding filament theory is the mechanism by which muscles are thought to contract at a cellular level. An understanding of the structure of skeletal muscle is useful when learning how sliding filament theory works. Each muscle is made up of a number of bundles of muscle fibers. Each bundle of muscle fibers contains anywhere from 10 and 100 individual fibers. Each muscle fiber itself contains cylindrical organelles known as myofibrils, which themselves are bundles of proteins called actin and myosin. Surrounding the myofibril, there is a network of tubules and channels called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, where calcium is stored. Each myofibril can be broken down into functional repeating segments called sarcomeres. If we look at a two-dimensional model of a sarcomere, it consists of actin and myosin. When a nerve impulse arrives at the muscle, it causes a release of a chemical called acetylcholine. The presence of acetylcholine causes depolarization, enabling calcium to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The calcium binds to troponin, changing its shape and so moving tropomyosin from the active site of the actin. The myosin filaments can now attach to the actin, forming a cross bridge. The breakdown of ATP releases energy, which enables the myosin to pull the actin filaments inwards, contracting the muscle. This occurs along the entire length of every myofibril in the muscle cell. When an ATP molecule binds to the myosin head, the myosin detaches from the actin and the cross bridge is broken. When the ATP is then broken down, the myosin head can again attach to an actin binding site further along the actin filament and repeat the process. This repeated pulling of the actin over the myosin is often known as the ratchet mechanism. This process of muscular contraction can last for as long as there are adequate ATP and Ca+ stores. Once the nerve impulse stops, the Ca+ is pumped back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum and the actin returns to its resting position, causing the muscle to lengthen and relax.
Yan. So that was your sliding filament theory. So also know that there is a law in skeletal muscles called the all or none. So meaning na yung muscle cell will contract to its fullest extent when it's stimulated adequately and it never partially contracts. No, hindi lang siya nagpa-partially contract. So in general, graded muscle contractions can be produced in two ways. That's that's by changing the frequency of your muscle stimulation, and second is by changing the number of muscle cells being stimulated at one time.
Frequency of motor neuron stimulation. A single action potential from a motor neuron will produce a single contraction in muscle fibers of its motor unit. This isolated contraction is called a twitch. The tension produced by a single twitch can be measured by a myogram, which is an instrument that measures the amount of tension produced over time. Each twitch undergoes three phases: a latent period, a contraction phase, and a relaxation phase. During the latent period, the action potential is being propagated along the sarcolemma and calcium ions are released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. However, contraction has not yet occurred. In the contraction phase, calcium ions in the sarcoplasm have bound to troponin, tropomyosin has shifted away from actin binding sites, and cross bridges have formed. Here, the sarcomeres are actively shortening to the point of peak tension. In the relaxation phase, tension decreases as contraction stops. Calcium ions are pumped out of the sarcoplasm back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and cross-bridge cycling stops. This returns the muscle fiber to its resting state. Although a person can experience a muscle twitch, a single twitch does not produce any significant muscle activity in a living body. A series of action potentials to the muscle fibers is necessary to produce a muscle contraction that can produce work. Normal muscle contraction is more sustained, and it can be modified by input from the nervous system to produce varying amounts of force. This is called a graded muscle response. The frequency of action potentials or nerve impulses from a motor neuron, as well as the number of motor neurons transmitting action potentials, both affect the tension produced in skeletal muscle. If the fibers are stimulated while a previous twitch is still occurring, the second twitch will be stronger. This response is called wave summation. Wave summation occurs because the excitation-contraction coupling effects of successive motor neuron signaling is summed or added together. At the molecular level, summation occurs because the second stimulus triggers the release of more calcium ions, which become available to activate additional sarcomeres while the muscle is still contracting from the first stimuli. Summation results in greater contraction of the motor unit. If the frequency of motor neuron signaling increases, summation and subsequent muscle tension in the motor unit continues to rise until it reaches a peak point. The tension at this point is about 3 to 4 times greater than the tension of a single twitch. This state is referred to as incomplete tetanus. During incomplete tetanus, the muscle goes through quick cycles of contraction with a short relaxation phase for each. If the stimulus frequency is so high that the relaxation phase disappears completely, the contractions become continuous in a process called complete tetanus. During complete tetanus, the concentration of calcium ions in the sarcoplasm allows virtually all of the sarcomeres to form cross bridges and to shorten. This allows the contraction to continue uninterrupted. Tetanus is the fusion of contractions to produce a continuous contraction.
Ayan. So, your muscle has response to increasingly rapid stimulation. So you have your muscle twitches, that's a single brief jerky contractions. No? So ayan. So ito ATP is the only energy source that can be used directly to power muscle activity. So at this point, at this level, no, you have to notice that ATP is the only energy source that can be used directly to power muscle activity. Yan. So as your muscle contracts, yung bonds ng ATP molecules, no, na-hydrolyze yun. And your muscle naman, they have though they have limited supplies of ATP, no? So when you say muscle fatigue, that's when your muscle is unable to contract even though it is still being stimulated. So the major factor of that is oxygen deficit. So it happens when a person is not able to take in oxygen fast enough to keep the muscle supplied with all the oxygen they need. So, yan. So, there are types of your muscle contractions. First is your isotonic contraction. So, meaning isotonics, that same tone or tension. So, myofilaments are successful in their sliding movements, the muscle shortens and movement occurs. Your isometric contractions naman, that same measurement or length. So, contractions in which the muscles do not shorten. So, the muscle tone, this is a state of continuous partial contraction, no? So, result of different motor units which are scattered through the muscle being stimulated by the nervous system in a systematic way. So, when you say flaccid, that's soft and flabby, and when you say atrophy, that's wasted away. So, effects of exercise on your muscles. So, muscle inactivity always lead to muscle weakness and wasting. So, regular exercise increases muscle size, strength, and endurance. So, first is we have aerobic or endurance. Results in stronger, more flexible muscles with greater resistance to fatigue. So, because yung blood supply to the muscle increases and the individual muscle cells form more mitochondria and store more oxygen. Pero yung aerobic exercise naman, di ba? When you say aerobic, you do cardio, di ba? You jog, you run in the treadmill, you run this particular miles, no? In this speed, no? That is just aerobic exercise, no? Or yung exercise na yun is for endurance, 'di ba? Hindi mo naman goal na increase yung muscle size mo for more power. So ang goal mo lang is to have more endurance to do for your muscles, no, to be hindi masyado na-fatigue. Dili ka agad dahil makapoy ang imong muscles. So ngano na because you have more mitochondria, no, to store more oxygen. So next is your resistance or isometric. So ito na, ini-increase mo na yung muscle size and strength, no? Grabe na ang pagpapabuff mo, nagwe-weightlifting ka na. So, fino-force natin yung muscles to contract with as much force as possible. So, ayan. So, why lumalaki yung muscle size and strength? It's mainly due to enlargement of individual muscle cells and amount of connective tissue that reinforces the muscle and also increases. So, ayan. So, muscle movements, types, and names. So, there are types. First is we have your origin. When you say origin, that is the one that's attached to the immovable or less movable bone. Yung insertion naman, yan yung tinatawag natin na it's attached to a movable bone. So again, your origin is attached to the immovable or less movable bone. Your insertion naman is attached to the movable bone. So pag nagko-contract yung muscle, yung insertion is nagmo-move towards the origin. So, ayan. Mga ano lang yan, mga dapat well versed lang kayo sa mga words na yan. So, next is your type of body movements. Ito, flexion, no? Lumiliit yung angle. Ganyan lang naman talaga ang simple way to explain it. It's flexion, di ba? Pinapalit mo yung angle. Extension, that's increasing the angle. So, di ba? Palayo. So, extension na more than 180 degrees, no, that is already called hyperextension. Ayan. Naghangad ka. Hyperextension na yan. Flexion, di ba? Lumiliit ang angle. Ito, lumiliit ang angle, so that's flexion. Increases the angle, extension. More than 180 degrees, that's already hyperextension. So rotation, no, that's self-explanatory. Movement of a bone along its longitudinal axis. So yan, may rotation na. Abduction, moving a limb away. Abduct, no, gi-abduct nimo. So moving a limb away from the median plane. Adduction, opposite side of abduction. So padulong na pod sa midline, no, that's adduction. Circumduction, that's already a combination of reflection, extension, abduction, and adduction. Such as your shoulder, diba? So, matuyok ra nimo. We also have what we say, dorsiflexion, no, up. Ang dorsiflexion and plantarflexion is up and down. So, pasakaan na, dorsiflexion. Pababa nga pinabali, that's your plantar flexion, no. Your inversion, ayan, inversion, padulong sa tunga, that's medially, of course. So inversion. To invert the foot, ayan, palateral, palabas. So we also have what we say, term the supination. That supination is turning backward. Ang pronation naman is turning forward. Yan. So, your muscles are arranged in such a way that whatever one muscle can do, other muscles can reverse. So, ayan. We have, the muscle has the major responsibility for causing a particular movement, and that is called your prime mover. So, yung muscle na nag-o-oppose or nag-reverse ng movement na yun, those are what you call your antagonists. And when the prime mover is active, its antagonist is stretch and relax. So, antagonists naman can be prime movers in their own right. Diba? For example, yung biceps mo, na yan yung prime mover ng pag-flex mo ng elbow, na-antagonize siya by your triceps na nagpapa-extend dito. Yung synergies, they help the prime movers by producing the same movement or by reducing undesirable movements. So, next is your fixators. These are what we call specialized synergies. They will hold a bone still or stabilize the region of a prime mover so that the tension can be used to move the insertion bone. To move the insertion bone. So, ayan. So, like bones, no, your muscles comes in many shape and sizes that suit to their particular task in the body. So, muscles are named on the basis of several criteria. Each of each focuses on a particular structural or functional characteristic. First is the direction of your muscle fibers. So, next is the relative to the size of the muscle. That's ano yan, pwede yun yung common na ginagamit yung mga maximus, largest, minimus, smallest, longus, pag mahaba. Location, no? Madaming madaming name ng muscles based on their location like your frontalis, temporal. Yan. Pwede din number of origins like biceps, triceps, or quadriceps. Pwede din location ng muscles origin. That's sterno. Pag galing siya dun sa sternum, merong tinatawag na sterno. Pag sa clavicle, meron namang mga muscles na nagsa-start ng clado. Pwede din sa shape ng muscle like pwede triangular pag deltoid, ayan. So, pwede din naman sa action ng muscles like pag nag-flexion, may mga muscles na name niya is flexor. Pag nag-extension, may mga muscles na tinatawag nating extensor. Pwede din may mga adductor muscles. Yan. So, based naman sa arrangement of fascicles, no, we have your circular, your convergent, no. Pag sabihin mo convergent is yung fascicles nagko-converge sila towards a single insertion tendon. So, pwede siya, 'di ba, parang nagko-converge siya. So, parang triangle or fan shape, no? So, this is your pectoralis major. So, yan, nagko-converge sila towards a single insertion tendon. So, pwede din namang fusiform and parallel. Fusiform, when you say, spindle shape. Yan, with an expanded belly. Yan. So, let's run through some of your gross anatomy of your skeletal muscles. So, let's start with your head and neck muscles. So, first is your frontalis. So, your frontalis covers the frontal bone. So, ito yung nag-raise ng eyebrows natin and nag-wrinkle ng forehead. So, huwag na yung origin insertion. Occipitalis, no, that covers the posterior aspect of your skull and pulls your skull posteriorly. Your orbicularis oculi naman, no, that's the one that runs in circles around the eyes. So, ito yung orbicularis oris, yan yung close ng eyes mo, pag kumikindat ka, pag nagbiblink ka, yan. So, your orbicularis oris, that's your kissing muscle. So, ito yung muscle na ginagamit natin tuwing naglalamutak ka. Ito yung ito yung muscle na responsible for closing the mouth, magpapouty lips ka, yan. Buccinator, ito yung nag-flatten ng cheek mo. So, ito yung nag-hold ng food. Ito yung nagko-compress ng cheek, no, tuwing ngumuya ka. Your zygomaticus muscle naman, that's your smiling muscle. So, that raises the corners of your mouth upward. Your masseter, it covers the angle of the lower jaw and closes the jaw by elevating the mandible. Your temporalis naman, that's a fan shape. Ito, the fan-shaped muscle synergies of the masseter para masirado yung jaw. Your platysma, it's a single sheet-like and it covers your anterolateral neck. It pulls the corners of the mouth inferiorly pag nagsasad clown face ka. Your sternocleidomastoid naman, these are paired two-headed muscles, one found on each side of the neck. So both muscles pag pag both of these muscles contract, no, ito yung nagfa-flex ng neck mo, no, like nag-prepare ka, di ba? So that's the job of your sternocleidomastoid muscles. So pag na-injure yung sternocleidomastoid muscles na yun, no, lalo na pag nahihirapan yung mama ng baby panganak, tapos may nasira habang sa process ng panganak, may na-injured sternocleidomastoid muscles. So ayan, nagkakaroon ng torticollis ang baby. So ayan, next is your trunk muscles. So first is your anterior muscles. Your pectoralis major. Your pecs naman, these are large fan-shaped muscles covering the upper part of the chest. Yan, ito. Sorry. Ito ang yung pectoralis major. Those are fan-shaped. Your intercostal muscles, they are found beneath your ribs. So, ito naman yung ribs mo, diba? So, may muscles na naka-attach dyan. Yan yung tinatawag natin na intercostal muscles. So, syempre, nag-assist yan para huminga. Next is your rectus abdominis, diba? Itong pinapangarap ng lahat. These are paired strap-like muscles. So, ito yung most superficial muscles of the abdomen. Kaya kung nag-workout ka, workout freak ka, no? Kikita talaga to. So, when it flexes the vertebral column and compress the abdominal contents during defecation and childbirth. No. Your external oblique naman, this one. These are also paired superficial muscles that make up your lateral walls of your abdomen. So, ito yung nag-rotate ng trunk and nagbe-bend nito laterally. Your internal oblique, yan, your internal oblique. These are paired muscles deep to the external obliques. Yan. So, next is your transversus abdominis, diba? Pag nag-dissect ka ng muscles, diba? Pag i-open mo yan, tanggalin mo ang skin, ang first mo makikita is yung external oblique. Pag i-slice na po na nimo ang external oblique para makita itong next layer mo na itong internal oblique mo na siya yung anak pagka-percent. Pag iwao na po na nimo, no, next na is your transversus abdominis na po na yung makita. That's the deepest muscle of your abdominal wall. Next is your traps. So this is the most superficial muscles of the posterior neck and upper trunk. These are diamond or kite-shaped muscle mass. Next is your latissimus dorsi. These are two large flat muscles that cover the lower back. Next is your deltoid. These are fleshy triangle-shaped muscles that form the rounded shape of your shoulders. No? So, dito tayo nag-inject pag may mga bakuna, mga ganon. Next is your erector spinae. So, deep muscles of the back na. So, yan yung favorite favorite tong itanong tuwing dissection. That's your iliocostalis, your longissimus, then your spinalis. Yan. So, quadratus lumborum. So, nandito na to sa posterior abdominal wall. Yan. Next is your biceps. No? This bulges when your elbow is flexed. So, ayan, di ba? Mga kapatid natin or mga kaibigan natin lalaki, kung maka-flex sila, kung may ma-flex naman, yun yung nakikita natin na biceps. So, your brachialis, that lies deep to your biceps muscles, no? And it's to flex the elbow, so it leaves the ulna. Your brachioradialis, this is a fairly weak muscle and resides mainly in your forearm. Next is your triceps. So, it's the only muscle fleshing out the posterior humerus. So, it's for elbow extension. And, pag straight arm knockout punch ka, yan yung tinatawag natin na boxer's muscle. Next is muscles of your lower limb. Ito na, ang mahirap palakihin. Your gluteus maximus. So, ito yung superficial muscle of the hip that forms most of the flesh of the buttocks. Next is your gluteus medius. Ito. Ang ganda din ito pag nag-workout ka tapos na-form yung gluteus medius mo. Maganda din. So, ito yung nagsistudy ng pelvis tuwing naglalakad tayo. And, ginagamit din ito to give injections. Your iliopsoas, this is a prime mover of your hip flexion and keeps the upper body from falling backward when you are standing erect. Next is your adductor muscles. This form the muscle mass at the medial side of each thigh. Hamstring group. These are muscles forming the muscle mass of your posterior, don't forget posterior thigh. And these are the prime movers of your thigh extension and knee flexion. So you have three muscles. It's your biceps femoris, semimembranosus, and semitendinosus. Next is your sartorius. Ito. These are thin strap-like Taylor's muscle. So yan. Your quads naman, quadriceps, that composed of your four muscles. It's your rectus femoris and three vastus muscles. So you have your tibialis anterior, superficial muscle on the anterior leg. So that acts to dorsiflex and invert the foot. Extensor digitorum longus, that's lateral to your tibialis anterior, prime mover of toe extension. Your fibularis muscles, that's found on the lateral part of your leg, so the whole plantar flexes and inverts the foot. So gastrocnemius is very important. This is what we call the toe dancer's muscles, so madami kasing sakit na may manifestation na sumasakit yung gastrocnemius, ganyan. Next is your soleus. These are deep na siya to the gastrocnemius. So, diseases. First is your Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So, this is genetic disorder characterized by progressive muscle degeneration and weakness due to the alterations of protein, what we call the dystrophin. Ito yung dystrophin, it keeps the muscle cells intact. So, this condition often affects boys due to the way it's inherited. It's mga XY genes yan. Next is your myasthenia gravis. So, this is a disease characterized by drooping of the upper eyelids. Mahirap mag-swallow, mahirap magsalita. At saka, may fatigability talaga and muscle weakness. So, bakit ganon? So, merong shortage ng acetylcholine receptors sa neuromuscular junctions mo. So, pwede din naman tong autoimmune, patient contains antibodies. When I say autoimmune, di ba? Yung sarili mong immune system, fina-fight nila yung yung katawan mo. So, ayan. So, yung ibang pasyente, meron din silang something na nag-aatake dun sa mismong acetylcholine receptors ng katawan nila. So, kaya nagkakaroon ng myasthenia gravis. Yan. So, that's your muscular system. Thank you for listening.